Let me start with you, perhaps, Tendani. Everyone seems to be predicting this gloom this year. Everyone seems to be suggesting that 2012 is likely to be more difficult than 2011. What is your prediction?
For me, the good thing is that we've anticipated largely what is going to happen in 2012, particularly in the South African economy. I am not seeing us going into negative territory. However, the growth that we are going to have around 3%, the biggest concern for me there would be that it's not growth that is going to generate a lot of jobs. This economy, if you look at GDP from the expenditure side, depends heavily on consumption expenditure. Now, if consumers are not going to have a significant growth in their disposable income, spending is not going to grow significantly. So for me, that is the biggest concern. We're not going to see a negative growth in GDP. I don't see, however, how consumers are going to spend robustly as they did before we had the financial crisis. Having said that, things for me that stand out as being a threat is potentially if we don't see an improvement in Europe. And I'm seeing that some periphery economies might even go into a recession. The ones that are in the core might not grow as strongly as we would like them to grow. Then we might have a problem from the supply side in South Africa from things that we're not going to be able to do anything about. For instance, our export might suffer if Europe doesn't recover significantly.
Chris, what are your thoughts then? Because it's quite interesting listening to what Tendani is saying. Some people are saying that whatever happens to us will largely depend on what happens to the Eurozone. If things get worse there, and things will get worse here as well.
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly right. Internally, South Africa, I think, is quite solid. There is nothing really on the horizon that's going to boost the growth rate, much beyond 3%. So in other words, it's pretty much similar to what we got last year in terms of economic growth. No compelling push factors, but there are lots of factors that could pull us down. And Europe is one of them. But Europe is a funny one because it's not completely clear to me that a recession in Europe and turmoil in Europe will actually then ricochet as something that will absolutely whack South Africa, because South Africa's got some critical investment advantages in yield, growth, and the country is solvent. Those three things are going to stand South Africa in very good stead. But I agree, this economy is not geared to create jobs. Policy is simply not right. We don't have the savings to actually fund the growth, and regulatory constraints means that small business are actually being put out of the picture, and that means there's no, growth. Job growth is going to be very difficult.
But when you say that the effects as a result of what happens in the Eurozone may pull us down, what do you mean? Are you suggesting that we may enter the negative territory?
No, not at all. I do think that we'll achieve positive growth this year. But it won't set the house on fire. In other words, there's no compelling case to put growth anywhere out of 3% sort of range to my mind. So I think it'll be roughly about 2 to 3%. But the Eurozone will be a drag on growth. Look, I don't think China will grow as fast as but I don't think it'll hit mineral prices this year too badly. But effectively, the case for a strong gold price is still there, a strong platinum price is still there, and that will help to support key, the mineral sectors. I think energy prices will also remain reasonably high, which will support our coal sector and that. But we've also got pressures on households, mainly in the area of on inflation that I think will be challenged, because inflation will be higher than growth, which means that will damage people's standards of living. The ability to generate income to overcome the inflationary effects is not going to be there.
And Chris, the difficulty here, especially in South Africa, is that this year is an important year politically, especially where the ruling party is concerned. And people must start accounting for some of the promises that they have made. And you can't continue saying to people, well, we are growing, but we can't really create the jobs that you want. You can't continue having a situation where only a few people are benefiting out of that economic growth. What then does South Africa do? Because you are likely to get a certain populism, if you will, in as far as economic policies are concerned.
No, exactly. We're already getting that populism, and that's why, in a sense, that the economy has shifted from being a job creator in the 2000s, from 2001 to 2008. The economy actually did create jobs, and we shifted away from those policies to more, as you say, more populist approach. But what's not recognized is the effect of corruption, for instance, on the delivery and the inclusiveness, because when you get corruption, it does shut the economy off to entrepreneurism. Because the economy is being shut out by policies that are actually intended to open it up, we're actually failing in that sense as well. Things like BEE policies are actually shutting the economy down because they're associated with, with connections rather than merit. And that's so important. The education system is letting us down because it's the skills development that is being compromised. And these are things that are well within South Africa's grasp to actually resolve, and yet I don't believe that they are. I think, in a sense, we need to actually say to what extent are we imposing costs and obligations on doing business in South Africa that aren't imposed elsewhere in the world. And that's what makes it difficult. So I go back to the original point. The core of the economy is very solid, very strong, but it's not structured to create jobs, but at all. And there's no ideas in government to do so. They're trying to go back to populist type of thinking that hasn't worked anywhere in the world, and saying, well, we're going to try and make it work here. That's the concern.
All right. A couple of SMSs already here with us. A lot of people, of course, have got a lot to say about these matters. Let me just read you one or two of those. Somebody says, in fact, it's Michael in Johannesburg who says, we won't eliminate poverty until we eliminate the parasitic capitalist elite, which creates poverty. Dave says, economists did not foresee the current crisis and did nothing to stop it. They have all the answers after the event. How do they justify their salaries? Interesting, because a number of people have questioned, of course, why is it that economists could not foresee, particularly the 2008 financial mess. Perhaps you may want to respond to that, Chris. What are these barriers, regulatory barriers, that of course will make it difficult for us to grow as necessary?
Well, I think let's start with the regulatory barriers, and then I want to talk about that capitalist property rubbishy comments, and I will be disparaging about gross ignorance. We know that communism failed. It failed utterly after 70 years and whatever. Capitalism has been here for 300 years and has supplied an enormous amount of wealth and created an enormous amount of wealth. Why people didn't see it is because you've got different strains of economic thinking, and I think it's the failure of Keynesian thinking, because you cannot simply continue to create, borrow and spend and consume your way out of, into prosperity. And there were plenty of economists of a different strain, but are not given the prominence. They actually saw this problem a long time coming. And so, that kind of broad sweeping rubbishy statement is in fact not helpful at all. There's certain things that we know works and that we know that doesn't work. For instance, we know that small business creates jobs in the millions. That we know works because it works in every single economy that has full employment, for instance, leans on small business. We don't do that here in this country, and we don't actually look at policies that will support small business in the forums like NEDLAC and all the rest of it. They don't. The small business just does not have a voice. Is drowned out because this economy is quite corporatized. It's big labor, big government, big business. You just go down, call it Main Street in Randburg, and look around the business. Are the main job creators there big business or and economic freedom is about opening up the economy. If
All right.
it was just about labor laws, we would be flying this economy. But it's not. It's the whole onion, the layers and layers of red tape that come from NERSA, ICASA, the Credit Act, the Consumer Protection Act, the empowerment requirements. It's an enormously complex, difficult regime, which only big business can deal with, only big government can deal with, and big labor.
Okay, Chris, I think that Dr. Peter Karungu, who's here with me in the studio, doesn't agree with some of the things. Dr. Karungu has been itching to respond to some of the things that Chris has been saying.
I think to start with respect to Chris, I find that very, in economic terms, very disturbing for two reasons. The last 1-2 years, we have seen huge debate on the status quo of the economic dispensation worldwide. Question being, is the capitalism or whatever drives the forces that are today the best way for people to live worldwide? It doesn't matter where it's coming from. It can be coming in form of Europe, where we are seeing even in the United States people occupying Wall Street. To rubbish this concern is not to help ourselves, is to fail to understand the fundamental principle of structural economic disposition today is to bring into board majority of the people. In the event capitalism has failed to do that, it's a question of when do we need to fight the change. That does not mean communism is correct. We are saying to say anybody raising an issue against a fact is to rubbish him is very uneconomical discourse, number one. Number two, if you look at South Africa, we have to look at historical perspective. To rubbish all the policies that are not accommodating the wishes of capitalism is to fail to understand that majority of the citizens of this country live under $2-3 per day. The question is, even if we do it right or wrong, is the status quo the best way to proceed? If we continue what has been before, Chris would say, yes, the economy will grow, but 80% of the people will be into perpetual poverty. Does that mean that, well, that's what we are looking forward to have? The answer is no. I propel, I support, and I argue all economic policies should be geared to tap into the potential for every human being so that he can be able to achieve the objective or the ability to which he can survive within the framework of legality such that we can be able to know the boundaries.
Chris, your response, please.
Certainly, what I'm trying to say, and what was not heard at all, let me put it another way. All wealth in society is created through business or enterprise activity. There is no exception. And so you have to lean on a business route to actually resolve it. The problems in Europe, etc., is a lack of economic recognition that you've got to actually understand what is wealth-creating activity and what's wealth-consuming activity. It's not to say wealth-consuming activity is bad, but you need wealth production before you can have that consumption. And Europe forgot about that. It's easy to repair. I certainly say that the economy needs to be opened up so that people have access to it. I use the term, for instance, we've got a lot of globalization taking place. I'd say that we need to actually adopt policies called localization so that the economy is accessible to local communities. It's relevant to local communities that people can access it for, to generate their wealth, because that's the only way they can generate it. You can't do it through grants or whatever the case is. That's only a temporary measure. It can never be a permanent measure.